Good morning, everybody. This is Janelle Pecano with the Ohio Department of Mental Health. We're here to conduct this webinar this morning on the incident reporting changes for residential facilities and community mental health agencies. I'm the Chief of Standards Development and Administrative Rules for the Ohio Department of Mental Health. And also on this broadcast this morning is Rob Nugent, who is the Community Client Safety Manager for the Department of Mental Health. Many of you who have submitted incident reports are familiar with Rob. He's the person who will read and review all community and residential facility incident reports and follow up as indicated, either with email, phone call, letter, or perhaps an on-site. This morning we are recording this presentation and broadcast. If technology works well this morning, then we intend to post this to the Department of Mental Health website later for people who are not able to attend this morning, or people that are here may want other staff to listen to this presentation. We'd like to go over some of the logistics for today. There is for the attendees, you should see on your screen a question function. So there is the ability to send questions during this broadcast. Please be patient for us here. It takes a little bit for time for the questions to come through and to be able to read them, but we will try to respond to those as best we can. There is also the ability for attendees to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, then we can unmute you and you can ask a question that way, and everybody that is listening to the broadcast will be able to hear you. So those are the two different ways to communicate with us. This is going to be, we're going to be going over both PowerPoint presentation, but we'll also be reviewing the reporting instructions and the incident reporting forms that have been previously sent out. And hopefully people have had a chance to download those forms and have them in front of you. I think it'll be a little bit easier to follow the presentation this morning if you've done that. Although, if not, you can certainly listen. And again, this should be available for a review again in the future. The PowerPoint presentation was also emailed last evening if people had the opportunity to download that. Please note that hopefully people will be patient. There's going to be a little bit of switching back and forth here on the screens between PowerPoint and the incident reporting instructions. If you haven't listened to one of my previous webinars, this is the third one I've done, so something I'm still trying to work with the logistics. Also, as an FYI, we had this happen during one of the live webinars as well as during a practice this week, that the audio connection that I had was lost. It was brief. One was only 10 seconds, and earlier this week it was a little bit longer than that. I believe that people receive a pop-up menu when that happens that shows them the audio connection is lost. But if for some reason, if I stop speaking for a period of time, it is being reestablished, or I would have to call in and access the audio connection in another way. Okay. So I think we have gone over, said, some of the different, the way, the logistics, how this webinar works. And we're going to go ahead and start the slideshow. Okay. All right. And today, the goal of today's event is we want to review the changes that affect the current reporting, the revised forms, although the forms basically follow the incident reporting instructions, so we'll be focusing there. And also going to be highlighting the differences in reporting between community agencies and residential facilities. I realize online that we're going to have community mental health agencies who do not operate a residential facility, and some who are subject to both the community mental health requirements and the residential facility requirements. There really are not a lot of differences between the two, so I thought it was a better use of everybody's time to just combine this into one webinar rather than do two separate webinars and point out the differences. I don't think, for a community agency, I don't think you're going to be spending a lot of time hearing about residential facility reporting. And I think we can just knock this all off in one shot. We're also going to answer questions. People had the opportunity to submit questions in advance to Rob Nugent, and those are incorporated throughout the PowerPoint presentation, sometimes directly where we have some slides that say advanced questions on them and we've written the question out or paraphrased it, especially if we got duplicate of same or similar questions. And other times just some of the information that we share throughout the PowerPoint should be answering those advanced questions as well. So if you submitted something in advance, you should hopefully see throughout this your answer is somewhere in the PowerPoint. And again, people can submit questions throughout. Do not feel they'll be at the end of the presentation. We'll open it up for additional questions. But if you have a question as we're going along, please feel free to send that either in writing or by raising your hand, and we'll try to catch that for you. So I want to talk a little bit about what is this about and why is this happening now. We had sent out in June 16th, I believe it was, a policy change, and an advisory letter was sent out. Those were sent by email to agency executive director listservs. And what we wanted to do is provide some regulatory reduction now. If people aren't aware, we have revised the incident reporting rules as well as the seclusion and restraint rules. They have gone through what we call the JCAR process, and that means we went through, there was a committee, the rules were posted for draft comment, we made additional changes, we started the formal rule process, we filed those, we held a public hearing, and then there was also a JCAR hearing. They've cleared JCAR jurisdiction, which means the department can assign an effective date on these rules at this point anytime that we want. And our decision has been to make that January 1st, 2012. Those rules, we recognize there's going to be some different changes in staff training and perhaps updating internal forms or performance improvement tracking, different things that agencies and residential facilities might need to do in order to implement those new change. Our intent is to provide training on that in the late summer, early fall, and give agencies and facilities time to train staff and make those own internal changes that they may need to do. However, there are also some categories that have been reportable up through June 30th that are not part of the new rules. For example, in the outpatient community mental health agency suicide attempts. And we wanted to make changes now to provide that regulatory reduction. If we've already identified that providers do not need to continue to report these certain incident types, we want to go ahead and make that change now rather than wait until January 1st. These are official changes. We have there at your second bullet point the different paragraphs. 5122.2613 is the incident reporting rule for community mental health agencies, and then 5122-3016 is the rule for residential facilities. Those rules always gave us the authority by their wording to make changes to the incident form and reporting instruction. The way those rules are written, it's sort of vague and up to us to define what is reportable. We did not want to use that authority to make the changes for the rules that we took through the JCAR process. We could have, but that really, those were different changes, and we really needed to have that public process to get input, to have external people serve on the committee and go through those processes. So we didn't want to do that, but we are using that authority now to make these policy changes and reduce the requirements. Okay. So we've, and at this time on this next slide, I want to point out and highlight especially that last bullet point. We're not adding any new incident categories at this time. There are going to be new ones. There's some references to that in the new revised incident reporting rules, and that is put in there to really hopefully help agencies. It's information that I think might be helpful to them in their long-range planning. Okay, but because we have this authority that I just talked about, these changes extend to all required reporting in the respective rules. You always have to report incidents to, if it goes to ODMH, it also goes to the Mental Health Board. There's a requirement for a copy to go to parents or guardians if applicable, And then in residential facilities, there might be, if you're a type 2 or type 3, you need to send a copy of that to an affiliating agency and agency from which the resident is receiving services. That also is usually only going to be applicable maybe in a type 2 or type 3. We do have some type 1s where people are getting services, some services in that mental health agency, but they're also receiving services, their main services in another agency. So I just want to make clear that there is not now separate reporting requirements through our administrative rules for reporting to the department and to the mental health boards. It is all one and the same. I'm not going to read these to you. These were contained in the advisory letter that people hopefully have had a chance to read, and an earlier slide did have the link to that advisory. If you don't have that, you can certainly download that after this event. But those are some of the highlight of the changes that have been made. And I also want to point out, you see on this slide under the community agencies, a couple of those, the top 2 bullet points are in purple. When there are differences between community and residential facilities, I highlighted that in purple, and I'll be pointing that out as we go along, but hopefully that'll help people see where those differences are. Okay. One of the things that is new and we sent out is separate forms and reporting instructions. Historically, there's been one form that both community mental health agencies and residential facilities have utilized. There's been sometimes some confusion about that because categories exist on the form for both. So a residential facility might see a category that only a community mental health agency needed to report, or vice versa. So they were sending in that information and reporting incidents that don't need to be reported. Now, when an incident does come in that's not a reportable incident, we do submit it, we do remove that from our system. So, it comes in, there's the record of it here, but it's not part of our incident reporting system. We do take it out. However, incidents, we are required by law to forward all reportable incidents to Ohio Legal Rights Services within 24 hours. So even if it's not reportable, they may get a copy of it before we determine it's not reportable. So we're hoping that these separate forms help reduce that confusion, and people can clearly see what they need to report based upon their setting. After people have had the opportunity to review the different forms, maybe implement that at the agency if you operate both, if you're a community agency and you have a residential facility, we'd be very interested to hear some feedback on whether or not that seems to be helpful to you. Okay. There are, again, a slide that shows where you can find these documents. And I want to point out, as much as there was a lot of time and review that was spent in putting these together and the information, and in my mind, I was certainly hoping that everything was perfect, but it is not. We have identified a couple of revisions that need to be made and a correction. We decided not to send those out in advance of today because I know that we have, probably over 100 people listening today, and if there's any other corrections or things that people point out, if they send that to us, we'll try to incorporate that. And we're not talking to changes about whether or not something is reportable or not, but just some information on there that may be incorrect. For example, on the form, the residential facility reporting instructions, a suicide attempt is currently a reportable incident, and it says that, but then on another page it says that it should not be. So we need to just fix that. Okay. Talk a little bit about the methods to report. We are not updating the WEIR system at this time. The department's energy and focus about WEIRs is updating it to reflect the new rules that are going to go into effect January 1st, 2012. To be honest, my understanding is that WEIRs will not be ready by January 1st, 2012. However, we're going to be going ahead with the rules at that time, and the training in the fall will address how to deal with that. I think there is, if I was to say now, I think there's a very high probability that at that point the reporting will be all on paper for a period of time. We have asked that the WEIRs, the new WEIR system should be very different than the WEIR system that exists today. It will be a more secure system. We've asked for that. We've asked for the ability to assign different levels of access to the system at the agency level, so you can maybe have somebody who manages it, people who can submit the information. A save feature currently now, if a incident report is filled out online on WEIRS, one, if you walk away for a period of time, you get timed out and you lose all your work. And we're quite familiar that people in this field, we get interrupted so many times a day, and that's not an unusual event. As well as some agencies prefer, staff would fill it out and they have, a supervisor or some administrative staff that they want to review it, and you can't do that in WEIRS right now. You can continue to utilize WEIRS to report. The reporting instructions do have a column to address that reporting via WEIRS. But there are categories on there that no longer exist. There are some questions that do not exist. Again, these are highlighted both in the PowerPoint, some, and as well in those reporting instructions. There's a new method of reporting, and that is by email. And there is the email address there, and you can fill out. These forms are in a Microsoft Word fill-in function. You can fill them out and email them to us, as well as fax, or some people still mail them. It's very rare, but we do occasionally get them by mail. That is a secure fax. And at this point, I want to do a poll question here, and that speaks to WEIRS. It's sort of a not very scientific one. We know that when WEIRS was first launched, and we did some training and explanation of it, some organizations never did start using it, which is fine. Some have used it and continue to do so, and others used it and stopped. So this poll question is and I apologize, I'm trying to launch the poll. Apparently, if I don't, apparently I didn't do that correctly. Go back. And, okay. There, I got that. I apologize, so everybody's patient with me on that. We'd just like to see if people want to participate this. If your agency, if you do not use WEIRS, just wanted to get some information about why. And so people should have that poll open, and if you can take some time and answer that. And you can answer as many of those as might be accurate to you. It's not, you can have 1, 2, 3, or 4 can be your answer for that. So, and we are, when we do the WEIRS, the first WEIRS was done, the department developed it, and we put the system in place. We trained people on it and said, here it is. If you want to use it, this is how it works. Part of the development this time will be developed here at the department, and then we will involve agencies in utilizing WEIRS and get some feedback. So before this goes live statewide, there will be some test runs, including different agencies in the system. And again, we've asked for a lot of different upgrades to what is currently in place. And I may have mentioned briefly also the ability to generate reports. We've told that might be a phase 2 of this new WEIRS system, but where agencies can generate their own reports and perhaps do some benchmarking reports off of WEIRS themselves rather than wait for the department to post it. Okay. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and appreciate information for people for giving us the feedback on that. It just helps give us, we hear anecdotally here and there some information from people. So I am, okay. Ooh. I have lost my screen, I think. Okay, I think, okay, everybody should have the screen back. Apologize again for that. All right. Okay, so now here's my disclaimer. I'm always interested in disclaimers. The PowerPoint is used in conjunction with the other forms, and I put this up there in part for people who may be accessing this after, not listening to this live, but after the fact, if they've just got a hold of the PowerPoint. Okay. So the first part we're going to go over is the fields that basically everything but the incident reporting category, and those are the fields that we give the incident information, time, date, provider, and client resident fields. Okay, I've gone too far, so let me switch over now to, I'm going to pull up the Community Mental Health Agency reporting instructions. There is, again, as I said, when there are differences between the two, I will point that out. And I'm not going to go over every different category here. I know that people have the ability to read it, and some of this information is self-explanatory. But again, as you see there, we talk about the index and those A's and B's. That actually corresponds with the form itself. Each form has, you'll see under here, an A, a B, and a C. So that's what we're talking about in the indexes. There's, you see the column with the WEIRS instructions. Some of the information is automatically filled in WEIRS. Sometimes there are going to be some differences, so we try to point that out for people. I do want to highlight their Index B, date of discovery, because this is one where people still sometimes people don't get that correct, and that's the date you learned that an incident is reportable. Okay, and that is what triggers also the timing for the reporting within 24 hours of date of discovery, exclusive of weekends or holidays. So if an incident happened 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, this is when it becomes reportable, is when your agency learns about the incident. Index C there, provider-generated incident number. I think when we switched to that, we had more providers who were submitting information that was not HIPAA compliant. That still does happen on occasion. So again, I would caution people to make sure that it does not contain any client information. That should not be coming in to us. An incident that is submitted is a public record. Okay. Provider name, we do ask that people put just the official name of your agency, or if you're a residential facility, it should match the name on your certificate. Just makes it a little bit easier for us to make sure that we know what or who this is about. And on page 2 of this, F, Index F, the name of the ADAM board that you report the incident to. A few years ago, there was even a committee that worked on this in terms of who to submit it to. I think it was a bigger issue for residential facilities. And it was submitted to, in a residential facility, it's submitted to the county of residence, and then after the county of residence, we submit it to the board in the county that the residential facility is located to. So if it needs to go to more than one board, by rule, we take care of the second reporting. In Index I, the name and title of the person to contact regarding the incident, and that is whoever is the person at the agency or residential facility that we should speak to. Historically, some organizations identify a single point of contact or a couple of different point of contacts, and they speak for all incident reports. Other organizations have multiple staff who may do that. The department does not, we do not dictate that. We do not regulate that. That is up to you. We just like to know who it is that we should be speaking with. Okay. The incident date K, or Index K, incident date. The reason I want to bring that up in WEIRS, please enter 99999999. Unfortunately, WEIRS requires you to put a date in there, and organizations have just had to sort of, some organizations have guessed something around the time, and I know that it can cause some internal consternation, and we did not have this on our previous reporting instructions, but that date at 99, I guess all zeros would serve the same function, just to mean that it is unknown. And the same with incident time. You can put that it's unknown. You can write that on the paper form. Just leave that blank on WEIRS. Okay. Index N, notifications made, and on the incident reporting forms, it'll talk about please select all of them that apply. And then there's on the form, there's a fill-in form where you can, if it's other. Let me go over to my PowerPoint here. And we're going to be adding to the list of notifications that are made. So this is one of the areas where we're going to make some changes to the forms that we just revised. Adding ODMH, that was originally on the form, and perhaps I wasn't thinking with all my brain power on that time, but it didn't. The intent was so that people didn't have to check ODMH. I know I don't think of it in terms of, oh, it just takes a moment to check a box, because I know if suddenly you've got a lot of different boxes to check, that becomes, a few moments, and we're all scrambling for, time to get everything done. However, people also send copies of these forms to boards or the parent guardian if applicable. So that's the reason we're going to reinstate the checkbox ODMH. And then on the residential forms, I need to add the agency from which the resident is receiving services. I think I included affiliating agency on that PowerPoint slide, but I did, that actually is already on the form. And you'll see that there are fewer boxes and choices. BHO, which is we all call our regional psychiatric hospital, court, DYS. There were a lot of different choices on there. Historically, quite honestly, I'm not sure where they came from, but we want to narrow this to the information that we need to look at, rather than just filling it out. Okay. And I am taking a moment here to answer some. I see some questions are popping up here. This I think goes back to the incident report email that says, will we receive a confirmation if we choose this method? And I guess what I can do, we'll make a note of that and look to see if that can be set up as an auto reply. I think we can do that, but to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the answer is. So we will have to look into that, and we will provide that answer after today's event. Okay, and I need to apologize here. I'm trying to manage that. I've got a couple people that are unfortunately apparently are having trouble hearing me, but my control panel shows that they're connected to audio, so I'm not sure how to, I don't know how to address that. The only thing I know is if somebody isn't connected to the audio, how to try to reconnect them. Okay. So index M, again, the notifications made, and you'll see that slide just points out what are the differences between the community mental health agency and the residential facility reporting. So now I want to switch back here to the community mental health agency reporting instructions. So we're now on client information, index N. And I guess before I was talking, I already talked about that HIPAA compliant information. I think I confused that with the provider generated incident number, so I apologize. But it's actually index N that I was referencing. And in R or Q, race, ethnicity, and there's select one. And let's see, I apologize here. I seem to have it. Okay, Q is race, ethnicity. We've added bi or multicultural to provide a choice, and that was basically done at the request of other providers over the past, that they felt that the previous selections didn't match people's the best description or designation of them. Okay. go back to R was the client, the victim or perpetrator. And there in the reporting instructions, it talks about if that's the role they have. And if the client had something happen to them, you code it as a victim. If they caused something to happen, including to him or herself, you code it as the perpetrator. And so we eliminated that other category as a choice. Now that does still show up on WEIRS. Again, we can't eliminate that, but because of the change in the reporting requirements, then we feel that victim or perpetrator clearly covers every incident that is currently reportable. And we did have an advanced question on that. If they commit suicide, attempt suicide, cause of self-inflicted injury, do we mark the client or resident as the perpetrator? And the answer to that is yes. So, going back here to community. And if another client was involved, index T to please list a provider-generated incident number of the other incident notification. And this is a change. Previously, you had to answer yes or no to every incident report that you selected. And thus, there's one of those examples I was talking about. There was a box that you were checking. And now, if it is true, then you just need to fill out that information. If it did not involve any other clients in that, you don't need to check any boxes or do anything further. You just skip that. Go on additional information, and it's a brief description of the incident you're reporting. If we need additional information, we will request it. And there in the reporting instructions is a couple of examples of that. One of the, I know in WEIRS, one of the feedback, now that I think about it, might have been one of the poll questions or poll options, that it was very limited in the number of characters that were typed in there. The fill-in forms, you should be able to type in and pretty much fill in that box, and it shouldn't run over, but you might want to check to make sure that it doesn't run over and everything that you type shows up on the screen or on the form if you're utilizing that to send it to us. And the X, the name of person completing report, if different than index I, and Y, the date report is completed, is different than the date in index A. We've had some internal discussion here about even including those fields, and maybe we'll continue to look at that. That we changed to the name of the person rather than the signature. It was always okay for it just to be printed, but in terms of emailing the incident forms in the past, some providers felt because it asked for a signature, you couldn't email a signature. Those boxes are there perhaps as much for agencies asking about information that they want so that internally they can track who is the person that's filling out the incident report. Again, we're going to be following up with the person who's identified as the contact person. And they're again talking about the signature. Okay. There's a data field in these sections that's no longer included on the paper forms. Again, it still exists in WEIRS, and that asks was staff injured as a result of this incident. That is not something that people need to be filling out this time. Okay. And give me just a minute here. I seem to have lost my question function. I apologize for this. It's gone away. I'm going to go ahead and try to keep on speaking, and at the same point try to find what happened there. And I'm not. Okay, there. I've got it back here. And I need to move that. Okay. So again, thank you for your patience here. So the next thing I want to discuss is the incident reporting categories. Okay. First one is use of abuse and neglect by staff. Again, we'll go back to the reporting instructions. Okay. So there you see, and at this point on for all the categories, everything is an index V. So the different categories themselves, or incident types, do not have their own index number. There has been no changes in this reporting. However, in the instructions down where the use of force, we've changed the language over, and we have the language that's in the seclusion or restraint rule, and this is the language that's also used in the new incident reporting rule that's going to go into effect in, again, January 1st, 2012. So we put that language in the reporting instructions. There's been no change to what constitutes use of force in reporting under this category. We thought in some places where it didn't change the intent, didn't change the reporting, anything that was expected of the agencies, that we could go ahead and put some of that new language in now and help providers as they transition over to what the changes in January 1st, 2012. Okay, and I want to point out, and it's again later in this presentation, but there has been no change, I'm sorry, I just said that. This use of force is only by staff. This is not use of force by law enforcement. You'll see later that that has been changed, and that is no longer a reportable incident. Okay. The death of a client. And again, this is the agency instructions that I have up on the screen. And for a community mental health agency, you report the death of a client if it's an accidental death that occurs on the grounds or during the provision of care. And in a residential facility, all residential deaths are reportable. That's how it was before, and so there has been no change of that. So residential facilities also need to report a homicide of resident, death by a natural cause, or if it's an unknown cause. Again, going back to your reporting requirements need to occur within 24 hours of discovery of an event. So at that time, you may not know what the cause of death in that residential facility was. So here there were some advanced questions that were submitted. On the homicide or death of a client in a community agency, it is not included in the new reporting instructions. Is it still reportable? And that is no. It was not a reportable incident prior to July 1st, 2001. So one of the things, and we do hope on the new reporting instructions that we put out there, that they are more clear and they make it easier to identify what is and is not reportable. And apparently we had some people who believed that before a homicide death of a client in a community agency was reportable when it was not. However, a homicide or death in a community agency by a client is a reportable incident. It was before and it still is. The next question is a natural death on premises or during the provision of care in a community agency still reportable? No. It might be an event the agency wants to review, QA or PI, but it's not reportable. And that might be. And the reason I also put that for something where an agency wants to review, that is the same for many of the incident categories that are no longer reportable, or we've changed the level of reporting. They may be significant events for an organization, but the department doesn't need to know about everything. Let me just say everything that goes wrong in a provider agency, whether it's a community agency or whether it's a residential facility. And just to give an example here of natural death, if somebody is on their way to your agency and they have a heart attack on the public sidewalk outside your agency, not inside, it's not on agency grounds, and they have a heart attack, you might have somebody who runs in and says, oh, please call 911. Your organization might have a nurse who goes out and tries to assist the person, provide CPR. They may be hospitalized. They may not survive the heart attack. but it, before it never hit what was reportable, but if that same event happened once they walked through the doors, it became a reportable incident. And a natural death is not something that an organization really has control. I mean, it's, it is part of life. People get sick, people have illnesses. It is different from an accidental death. That is still reportable because an accidental death does denote that there might be something that needs to be reviewed, looked at, something that needs to be changed to reduce if there was some sort of risk that caused that accident. Last bullet point here, death of an unknown hotline client, still reportable. And again, this is sort of the unknown hotline client. You may have somebody who calls in on a hotline. They're also an open client to your organization, and if they're an open client to your organization, receiving other services, you follow all the reporting instructions throughout. If a hotline client does commit suicide while on the call, then it would be a reportable incident. And then I put in there, technically, we thought about if they die of accidental causes, it would be reportable. I can't imagine how that would happen, but I'm sure it's possible. So that's where reporting for a hotline client comes in. If you have the situation where you've talked to somebody on the hotline, and then you might read an article in the paper that seems to fit that somebody that you talk to. And I myself personally, I mean, I worked on a hotline. I trained people on a hotline long time ago, back in the 80s. So I know that happens. There's phone calls that you feel pretty positive about. There's some where, when that phone call terminates, you're very concerned and about what the outcome is. But to meet the reporting requirements, that is the time when it is reportable. And I've got another question here. Okay, we have one of the things that, if you're not familiar, these questions come into me like one line at a time. So as one outpatient client attacks another outpatient client in the waiting room, do we complete one incident report or two? One for victim, one as perpetrator. Okay. I'm not, in terms of that question, this is an outpatient. Okay, what's reportable is the death of a client. So if a client attacked another client in an outpatient in the waiting room or something, and somebody died, it's one incident report, because it would be, and the screen hasn't popped up yet, but homicide or suspected homicide by client, that is what would be reportable. You may put that information in the instructions. If it is an attack and it results in injury, that is no longer reportable. Serious bodily injury is, oh, and I apologize, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, physical assault injury, it's reportable if it, and we haven't got there yet, if it results in emergency or unplanned medical intervention or hospitalization. And again, that would be reported as one incident. I will mention in the new rules in January 1st, 2012, you will have the ability for everything, even when it involves, right now, if certain things trigger multiple reporting, they involve more than one. Usually it's most common in a residential facility, an event that involves maybe 3 residents or 4 residents. Right now you are required to fill out 4 different incident report forms. The only exception to that is if it's sort of an occurrence where people have to be relocated, a fire or another disaster. That will change in January 1st, and at that point we are switching over to incident reporting, 1 incident report per event. The next question that I have is, will the mental health boards also accept emailed incident reports, or is this an individual board decision? At this point, this would be an individual board decision. We have talked about that, not with the boards yet, so the boards that are listening today, we have talked about that with our WEIRS people, of whether that we can create a system in WEIRS so that agencies can also utilize that system to send the incidents to the department and to the boards at the same time, and perhaps even enter their other reporting. But we're not far enough along in the WEIR system to even have that discussion yet with the boards and what that would entail. So that is something that we are looking at in the future. I have another question. Since ODMH now oversees adult group homes as of July 1st, 2001, do agencies need to report suspected abuse, neglect by group home staff on this form? Thank you. Okay. At this point, the agencies or their adult care facilities and residential care facilities that were previously licensed both by the Department of Health or the Department of Aging will continue to follow the incident reporting rules and requirements that they've had, and are not, this form is not set up for their use. We do have some meetings scheduled here at the department to discuss the incident reporting, and if that changes, we will be advising people at that time. So we're doing our best, to get that information out. Next question we have, how is a vehicular death classified? No unusual circumstances. Okay. For more clarification, off-site at time of accident. Okay. If it is an accidental death that occurs, and I assume that is the question for the vehicular death. If it is an accidental death that occurs during the provision of treatment, then it would be a reportable incident. And I actually have a little bit slide later to talk about now serious bodily injury in that regard. Okay. So there are, and we do recognize, there are some information, there is some information or some incidents that still may be outside of the control of an agency or a facility. They have to be reported. We'll get that information and we'll file it. But we do believe overall that these change in reporting instructions allows us to focus on the incident types that we really need to know about, and we may want to do some follow-up too. And I also want to let you know on the question about emailing to the question about emailing to the boards. Currently, organizations can email from WEIRS, but you have to work that out with their ADAM board. And I forgot about that, but I believe there is some system within WEIRS which that allows organizations to do that. Okay. So we are moving on here. Next question that we had in advance about an individual in a residential facility. It's reported as soon as it occurs, perhaps before cause of death. You never need to submit a second incident report on the same incident. If incident reports can be updated, they can be changed if they need to be. We would be following up on a residential death, and we certainly know and recognize you may not know. You may not necessarily know. Unfortunately, if somebody went and they took pills, they came in later in the evening, had taken some pills, and immediately walked in and maybe went to sleep, and unfortunately, died as a result of that, you're not going to know whether or not it's a natural death and they died during their sleep, and find out during the coroner's report. So we will get the additional information as part of the follow-up. And then the next category is homicide, suspected homicide by a client or a resident. And again, that's now a separate category on the new form. And if you're reporting it using WEIRS, then you use the death category, and it has suspected homicide subtype. Okay. I'll go back to the reporting instructions now of involuntary termination of treatment by an agency or facility. This is a reportable incident only when the three things that are there in that middle, third column over, are triggered. So it is not, we do understand there are times when agencies do need to terminate the treatment of a client or a facility. However, in the client right rules is actually where this comes from. You are required to let them know in advance of the termination. You're to give them a reason and to offer a referral to the client or the residential facility. If those three things, and all of the three things need to occur, so if one of those three things does not occur, then it is a reportable incident. Okay. If they all occur, it is not. And this really is something that should rarely be reported, because I think organizations and facilities generally do a good job with this. They're not, dumping clients and dumping residents. So advanced questions. Does that apply to a client that doesn't return, they can't locate, they don't respond to letters sent? No. In a perfect world, every time a client or resident was going to terminate treatment, they would let us know of that, but we know that that's not really what happens. So if they stop treatment without notification, it is not an involuntary termination. Certainly, in that question talks about, they're trying to locate. We realize this is a vulnerable population. Your agency, facility might be trying to locate them, send letters, make some other phone calls, whatever the organization feels is appropriate. That's also true for residential facility. Generally, as part of the residential agreement that somebody signs or is executed when somebody comes in, it might address some information such as, if you don't come, show up for a day or 2 days or 3 days, basically how long you may hold a bed for. That might be part of the agreement. I did want to put a note of caution there. We also have clients that, aren't really good. They miss a lot of appointments. That's a very different situation with a client that has stopped showing up for treatment, one that frequently misses appointments. The next question we were getting isn't about how much advance notice of the termination is required. Our rules don't address this, and I suggest that organizations have that in your policy. You might want to discuss sort of that process. Who can make those decisions? What kind of review? Is it, in an outpatient mental health agency, is it something that you review with the supervisor and discuss with the person who's supervising the service? Is there a team that makes the decision, the chief clinical officer? Again, that is all information that is up to your organization. And you're going to look at the situation. Age, what is the setting, what is your type of facility? And there I give an example. If you're, a residential facility, say, for adults, and, somebody's been non-compliant with their treatment plan for months, I would expect, and again, this isn't a rule, I'm just sort of thinking sort of the common sense, approach to it, that you can give some more notice there than maybe you have a resident who comes in and that resident has attempted to sexually assault other residents. You might be an organization that you don't generally take sex offenders. Perhaps it wasn't known because, as another example, the expectations for an organization, a facility that does treat sex offenders should hopefully have some different things in place for supervision than one that is not their focus of treatment there. So again, we want to offer that flexibility there. Unfortunately, when you try to regulate everything to the nth degree, then you will end up over-regulating and hurting people. So we want to have some flexibility within the rules. And hopefully that's helpful for people as they're trying to sort of figure that out. But again, I recommend address that in policy and in staffing. Okay, we have and I'm going to try to get out of this. It does freeze up here a little bit on me. Medication error and adverse reaction is the next incident category there. And you report that only when it results in permanent client harm, hospitalization in a medical unit, or death. And there we do have the two definitions of a medication error and adverse drug reaction. And I'll go back to the slideshow. And the threshold for reporting is higher and or more clear, because I think this is unfortunately an example of our previous instructions. It sometimes was hard to see whether something is reportable, because we have that term likely to have occurred. Serious injury or death was likely to have occurred. and that could be subject to different interpretations. So that is no longer part of the instructions, and again, it has to result in hospitalization in medical unit, permanent harm, or death. And it's another thing to point out that it doesn't mean other types of medication errors and adverse incidents are not important. They're not insignificant events. They are things that the provider should review as part of its QA, PI processes. They just do not rise to the level of reporting that the department needs to know about it. Again, we do not need to know about every time something goes wrong in an organization. And we'll go. All right, and I should just stay on my PowerPoint here. This one, occurrence which necessitates temporary relocation of residents and emergency unplanned medical intervention. It is not reportable in a community mental health agency, and it is reportable in a residential facility. There has been no change in the reporting of this. This slide is just up. Again, we wanted to point out where there are differences in reporting between the community mental health agencies and the residential facilities. So serious bodily injury when emergency or unplanned medical intervention or hospitalization is required. And I want to switch back over because I also want to point out the definitions here. Okay, this is another one. There's differences between the community and the residential facilities in terms of the types of events where it is reportable. But first we'll start on the reporting instructions. We have this definition, emergency unplanned medical intervention, and I'm not going to go over all of it. It's performed by a doctor, physician's assistant, certified nurse practitioner. It's basically medical treatment that is not first aid, and you see here it includes other treatments not listed under first aid, and then we have that first aid definition below. Hospitalization means inpatient treatment at a medical acute care hospitalization. You do not need to report psychiatric or hospitalization in a psychiatric unit. And then we also, an injury is an event that requires medical treatment that's not caused by physical illness or medical emergency. And I think those are important because previously illness and medical emergency was a reportable incident, both in the community and the residential facility, and they are no longer reportable under both those settings. So if somebody's got the flu, somebody has a bad cold, whatever it may be, you don't need to report that to us. So the injury definition is there because it's certainly, again, if you sort of think of, the differentiate, something happened, somebody fell, somebody hit somebody, something happened to cause that event that requires some type of medical treatment. And then the definition of first aid is included there because it ties up to what is not, emergency unplanned medical intervention. That first aid definition in and of itself, at this time, there is no level of reporting that is associated with an injury that requires only first aid. That will change January 1st. You'll learn all about that in the fall, but I do want to make sure that people are understand that. And again, want to point out here the slide where the differences between the community agencies and the residential facilities is in a residential facility, a self-inflicted injury is a reportable incident. Both of them obviously report the physical assault and restraint or seclusion related injury. And we're going to be revising the form itself to actually, the form says restraint related injury, it doesn't have or seclusion on that. So again, that's one of those, that one I think is a small technical change that we'll be adding to the form. Okay, and I'm trying to, give me a moment here to go up to, and I'm reading here. And I guess I'm going to ask Rob, I can not quite, Rob Nugent has sent me a message, and Rob, if you want to maybe explain what you're trying to send over there, because I'm not catching it, and you should be able to speak.
Yeah, in the past, agencies have asked if a client goes to the emergency room or is placed in 23-hour observation, which is just an observation bed, whether they have to report that. In the past, we've had them report only if they've received medical care greater than minor first aid or greater than first aid. So it's just distinguishing between that definition where they're in a hospital bed versus, they're admitted to the hospital versus 23-hour obs, which is an outpatient service. So I would think that would remain the same, that if they receive care that, is greater than first aid from a medical practitioner, that would still be reportable. But if it's just 23-hour obs and they're doing x-rays and things like that, that would not be reportable.
Okay. And that's a good point. And I've gone back here on your screen to emergency unplanned medical intervention. And there in the second line means treatment required to be performed. And treatment is a very important part of that definition. It is part of also, first aid. And when we worked on that, so if somebody, if somebody goes for observation, if you have to call 911 and the ambulance comes and they decide to take somebody, in, but no treatment ends up being provided, or it ends up being something that is very minor, then it does not meet that definition of emergency unplanned medical intervention. I have to say the definitions, they might seem very simple. We spent a lot of time trying to develop them. First aid, I'll give a shout out to Teresa Lample with the Ohio Council, spent a lot of time with me on that. And again, that'll kick in more as the level of reporting that's associated with that in January, to make sure that we're clear about what we're looking for. So again, focus on, it is on treatment, not the setting. So, and conversely, if it's something where it might occur at your agency, you may have a medical doctor that provides some of this treatment at your agency, so then it would be a reportable incident. Okay. We're going to, the next one is sexual assault, and that's an allegation of one or more of the following sexual offenses as defined by Chapter 2907 of the Revised Code. And I also want to point out here the WEIRS instruction: do not complete if type is sexual assault was minor involved. And the reason for that is, I'm going to complete this and then I'm going to go back. I missed my slides on serious bodily injury, so I'll complete my thought here and then I'll go backwards, and I apologize. Previous instructions required reporting of all consensual sexual activity involving minors, and that is no longer reportable. It is specific to when one of those crimes, and those are crimes according to the Chapter 2907 of the Revised Code, that there's an allegation of one of those crimes. So consensual sex. Now, if so, there's a difference between, and there's legal differences between consensual sex, between sexual activity between two 15-year-olds or two 14-year-olds, versus you might have consensual sexual activity between a 14-year-old and a 23-year-old. Well, that may be consensual, but that's going to trigger, it's actually an allegation of a crime according to Chapter 2907 of the Ohio Revised Code. So again, we're looking at allegations of actual criminal contact. And the reporting now between on sexual assault is actually the same. So it's the same reporting for minors and adults. There are no differences. Okay. And you report it at this time only when the alleged victim is the client. And that's another area I need to correct the reporting instructions to state this. I wasn't, when I was working on that part of it, I misunderstood the previous reporting instructions. And another good reason why they have we're updating them. That will change in 2012, but we will worry about that at that time. And now I want to go back here. I apologize for the couple of the advanced questions on serious bodily injury due to physical assault. And that question here, they talked about the draft rule that'd be reportable if it happens on grounds during the provision of care. And the new instructions don't specify this. When is it now reportable? It's reportable in a residential facility when the client is the alleged victim, and that's consistent with the instructions prior to July 1st, 2011. And that's going to be different when the rules that go into effect. So at other times when the other persons, when it's staff or visitors or somebody else is the victim, that will not be reportable until January 1st, 2012. And then they're also talked about accidental injury has been, oh, and I typed that up wrong on that slide. I apologize. It says since accidental injury. Oh yeah, that's right. I apologize. Accidental injury has been eliminated under serious bodily injury, and this isn't a community mental health agency. How would it be reported if there's a fire at the agency? And it is not reportable in a community setting. It is, that's one of the things when we did go through and eliminate some of the category, and we made the decision to eliminate serious bodily injury and emergency unplanned medical treatment, we kind of missed that. So we are going to review it. We can't make any revisions to the rule now. We can't make them till after they go into effect. So we'll be looking at it. But we're not going to plan to propose adding all events. And I said, if a client and staff are they're sitting in a car at a red light, they're hit by a truck, doesn't stop, and both are hospitalized, it's not necessarily one that needs to be reportable to the department. Okay. All right. And let me again, there we go. Suicide attempt, community agency, no longer reportable, and it is still reportable in a residential facility. And that is a change that, community suicide attempts and community agencies actually account for 30-something% of our reportable incidents in community mental health agencies. So we do believe that by eliminating that will certainly help reduce the required reporting for organizations. Okay. All right. I have, let's see, the next. And then now there's another index now on the form. As a result of the elected incident, are criminal charges against a client being pressed by staff. That occurs on your, occurred on the old paper forms, and that is not part of the new forms. It's actually down this area down here in the bottom right-hand corner. So again, that's another one. It is eliminated. We can't take it out of WEIRS, but organizations do not have to answer that question. And we understand, if people do answer the question, if they fill it in, you're not doing anything, wrong or anything like that. It's not something that you need to do. And it's up to every organization how they want to prefer to report, if they want to use the paper reporting because the forms match up better, or they want to continue to use WEIRS. That's entirely up to the organizations. So. And I want to put this up, and that is sort of a review of all of the reporting instructions and the forms themselves. I do want to do the reminder that there are other categories which are no longer reportable: illness and medical emergency, use of force by law enforcement. And again, we're not saying that those aren't significant events or events that an organization needs to utilize, but they're not things that we think rise to the level of reporting. And in part, sometimes it's also because of the control. And use of force by law enforcement, while an organization can control when they call police or law enforcement to the agency or the facility, there are other times that police or law enforcement come. They might be bringing a client or there for another reason, and they may get involved. And regardless of whether the organization has called or requested the presence of law enforcement, An organization does not have control over the actions by the law enforcement officers, which is the reason that we took that off the required reporting. Okay, and again, reminder, they'll continue to appear on WEIRS until the new system is developed. Okay. Already discussed that about first aid. I'll go over some more reminders that, again, January 1st, there's going to be some additional categories of incidents which require reporting. There's one we call medical events impacting agency operations. When you see that, when the time has come, and the rule is out there, again, it's a definition we spent some time on to make sure that it's a very narrow reporting. For the most part, providers, these new categories, we don't think that they will frequently be reported. I don't think, sexual assault by non-staff of visitors or staff, the agency, residential facility grounds, is not an event that happens. This medical event that impacts agency operations, it kind of, that's going to be the time when the health department has wrapped your agency or facility 3 times around with yellow tape, and you've had to, nail a dead cat to the door to warn people to stay away, that people are at risk. It's not minor things like, everybody has the flu. So the definition of that is very specific to, again, try to limit the reporting. So we do not expect an increase in reporting in the categories, with the exception of the seclusion and restraint related injury categories. So just to make everybody aware of that. Okay. Again, as I talked about, we're going to make some revisions to the reporting instructions and report forms, and we will send another email to the executive director. I also, I'll add in here now, we are, in the past, a few years back, people used to have the ability to sign up to get alerted of information that we would send via email or mail to an executive director. It was not a listserv. It became a very unwieldy operation for me to manage with an Excel file. We are pursuing that again, and hopefully we'll be, hopefully here at ODMH we can put up a sign up, and people who want to sign to get notified of things, rule activity, events, communications like this. So we'll provide that more information, but we are trying to do it. I myself, if people haven't learned, am not a technology whiz, but hopefully our OAS staff can do that for us. Also, again, that incident report, new incident report, if people want to utilize that, we will get back and get an answer to that auto reply email, and that WEIRS is not going to be updated. I'm going to put where you can find. I've made reference to those rules, which will go into effect January 1st, 2012. And let me see if I can switch over here. We have this, well, that certainly didn't work. Okay. Here is from the department's rules webpage. And you can get this from the front page. And you can see under there, rules in effect, draft rules, and then pending rules. There's a link there, and that will list everything that we have pending with, that's filed with the Register of Ohio. Under here, the incident notification rules, 2613. We talked about the special treatment and safety measure rules. So I wanted people to have a chance to look at that. We also have from our webpage under licensure and certification, some links. There is the WEIRS is down here under incident reporting, and to go under certification of community mental health agencies, at the bottom is the incident notification rules, forms, and reporting instructions, and that same information is also there under the residential facility link, so people can do that. I have a question. What do I estimate the time frame to be for the revisions to forms and instructions? Some of them I've already put them into the forms. I think, if anybody has seen something today to think of, they want to send me an email or send Rob an email, but those will be done hopefully by next Wednesday, I will say at the latest, perhaps sooner if we don't get, because like I said, we've got all these people looking at it and reviewing the information, and I like to think I can get everything right, and unfortunately just did not get it this time, so I apologize for that. Are there any more questions? I think I've answered everything. There's somebody asked, is the presentation available as a PDF file? They are, like I said, the recording of this webinar will be posted, and as well as the PowerPoint slides. And I cannot speak to how that is posted. I did send the PowerPoint. I'm kind of learning. We were upgraded here to the 2010. I know that not everybody has that, so there's been some difficulty at times opening both Word and PowerPoint. I hope everybody was able to open these. I did go back and save them in the prior formats. If you cannot open something that I send you, then please feel free to give me an email, send me an email, and I will get it to you in another format. And doing one more, and also if, okay. And if you have questions after today, you can always follow up with me about anything that relates to rules. And then for incident reporting, including the instructions, the forms, Rob Nugent is your main point of contact for that. And there's his phone number, there's his email. Be more than happy to address any questions. And I do want to also launch, if I can do it, one more poll. I've talked a little bit about upcoming training for the incident reporting, and our original intent for that was to do regional training, and but now that I've done all of 3 webinars and we've gotten some response from people, would like to get your feedback there, whether you think whether a series of webinars would you prefer or regional trainings. I know I personally, I like going out and doing the training. I like the opportunity to get to meet people face to face. This is, you know, sitting here speaking into sort of the open space and not getting the opportunity to see you. You know, I just like to get to see people and talk to them and have some side conversations. It's one of the things I enjoy about, you know, the CARF and Joint Commission trainings that we do, and COA, which we, because of their process, we don't hold as frequently. However, this is, you know, we want to utilize the format that we think people is best for the organizations, because you are, you know, you're the customer here, and we want to meet you, meet your needs. The series of webinars, because the training between the new incident reporting rules, seclusion restraint, will be, if I'm going to guess, depending on your organization, if you needed to hear everything, possibly up to 6 hours. So we would not do one 6-hour webinar. I'm sure, as witty as I can or cannot be, that people would fall asleep. But we would do it as a series of webinars. Okay. So again, I am okay. One last check for questions. I'm not seeing anything come in. I think there's another question about receiving an email confirmation for an MUI. We're going to get back with everybody on that. Sounds like it's a good question. I think it's one of those where we think let's look into that. And okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead now. I appreciate everybody who's provided their responses to the polls. I appreciate everybody who's listened today. And again, we will make this recording available on the ODMH website. We'll send a notification when that is available as well. Perhaps I can get all these things accomplished around the same time and send one email. I know we all get lots of them. And again, please, any further questions that you have, please contact Rob or please contact me. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you.